Good afternoon, everybody. Tim Noka here from ProTech. Good morning still to anybody that is west of Eastern Standard Time where we are, Eastern Daylight Time, I guess. So welcome to the webinar. And again, thank you for taking the time out to do this. I'm the wingman for the webinar. The brains in the room belong to Kay Corey Aubrey, who I will introduce in just a moment or two. Just want to lay out a couple of ground rules. 15 minutes after the hour, we're going to take a break for questions, and we will wrap up all of the webinar's contents by 30 minutes after the hour, and Kay and I will stay until all the questions are answered. So again, thank you very much for your attention this afternoon. I'd like to introduce to you Kay Corey Aubrey, a user experience researcher who helps her clients understand their end users' needs and their goals so that they can design better products for those end users. Kay specializes in usability testing and face-to-face ethnographic consumer research. In addition to providing qualitative research, she also trains teams in usability testing, UX research, and user interface design. She's an editor and a REVA certified master focus group moderator and, of course, trainer. So with that, Kay, we look forward to you entering us into the world of usability testing and improving our methods so that we can achieve better results in the next 30 minutes or so. Thank you very much. There you go, Kay.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that beautiful introduction, Tim. I really appreciate it.
I think you earned it.
See. Well, why don't we get started here? I am going to just basically give you an overview of usability testing in the next 25-30 minutes. And here's what you can expect as we go through this webinar. What you're going to learn is an overview of usability testing, its language, some of the language involved, and when to use it in a research project or in an IT project. And these are the things we're going to cover. Basically, I'll tell you how typically usability studies are planned, how you run and moderate them, how you analyze and report on them. And the focus all along is on quick, agile discount methods that minimize cost and effort. Now, why don't we take it from the top and just kind of ask this question, what is usability? Well, it means different things to different people, but I'm going to take you through a couple common definitions. First of all, let me start with a little bit of a story. About 10 years ago, I traveled to Los Angeles for a job, and it was the middle of the night. It was like 3 o'clock in the morning when my plane landed. And I went to the Alamo car rental, and the clerk told me to go to such and such a carol. So I did that. I sat in the driver's seat, and this is what I saw on the right. And I had absolutely no idea what to do because I had never seen this push button for the way to start a car. So I was totally lost. So I went out, searched for someone to help me, and finally the guy came by, and what he did was he sat in the driver's seat and pushed the button, and didn't I feel silly? But I had absolutely no idea that this is how, this was the design of this particular type of car. Well, apparently I am not alone, because last year my husband and I were on a vacation and we got a rental car, and I noticed that this is what they handed us. Same thing, they gave us a fob, but notice that there's this little notch on the end. And they even created this little place where you'd put that notch into the car. So that is an example of what's called in usability a mental model. My mental model for how to start a car was you use a metal key, you put it in the ignition, and you start it. Well, I had never seen that type of design before, so I was totally lost. So what the designers here have done is they've created sort of a transition in the design where they put a key-like element on the design of the fob, and they created this kind of fake little ignition just as a way so that everybody who drives a car would have the same mental model for how you start it. Here's another common example. So this is an example of thermostats. Now, which of these would you rather use to set the temperature in your house? Well, if you're technically inclined, like a lot of the people in this audience I'm sure are, you might gravitate towards something like this programmable thermostat here. But most people would just be lost with something like this. This design here actually creates a burden on people, a hurdle. So what they would do, most people, is they would probably gravitate towards something that looks more like what they're used to, their mental model for how you set the temperature, which is this very simple device here where you just basically turn the dial and you know, to where you want the temperature to be, and this is telling you what the room temp is. Well, Nest figured this out, and it was probably through early stage user studies. And so what they came up with is this design here that looks a lot like a traditional old-fashioned 1970s thermostat, but has all the technology underneath it. So between the app and this as a display, you're able to, you know, enjoy all the technology that this delivers, but with a familiar package, a package that matches your mental model. Now, in the world of usability, mental model is absolutely critical. And when you're running usability studies, that's one of the things, especially in the early days of your usability study, when the product is still being formed, that is one of the things that you're trying to figure out from your users. Will they understand this design without a whole lot of instruction? So that's one dimension of usability, mental model. Here are some other dimensions of issues with design that create usability issues. Unfamiliar language, that's probably next to having an obscure mental model or something that the end user doesn't get. Having language and terminology on the device or the screen throws a lot of people off. That probably accounts for, in my experience, about 40% of the usability glitches. There's also design issues around unnecessary complexity. The product design that the person needs to use when they use the product doesn't match the user's workflow. Simple things like not knowing where to start, not knowing when you're done, not getting adequate feedback from the product as you're using it. So all of these issues here on this slide are things that we look for in a usability test, because these are typically things that make a design not work for end users. So what is a usability study? Well, it's qualitative research, and qualitative research is a fancy term for just research where you're sitting in front of the person to person, conversation, research, but yet there's a methodology and a rigor to it. So you're getting good data. In a usability study, the participant, you give them a task list and they go and they complete each task on their own. And hopefully, as they're working through the task list, they're sitting in an environment that's similar to where they're going to be using the product. So if your product is geared towards manufacturing, the shop floor, that's where you want to run your study. If it's an app that a person could use anywhere, you want to go into that coffee shop and run those usability studies there so that all the distractions, all the noise, all the lighting is exactly the same as what you'd find in the real world. Now, when you're running a usability study, you never want to interfere with the person. You want to set up that study so it stands on its own two legs, and you can talk as the moderator as little as possible. And what you're really looking for in all cases is whether the product design speaks to the participant, whether it allows them to complete their tasks without any error or excessive effort, whether that product meets their expectations and fits into their typical workflow. So these are, in a nutshell, this is what you're trying to achieve when you run a usability study. Now, another component of running studies is it's very much a team effort. You never want to do this on your own. You always want to bring stakeholders along with you because it's also a political process. A lot of people have skin in the game in terms of the design, in terms of the assumptions, in terms of being able to get that product out the door and not have excessive customer support calls. So you want to make sure that you're inviting stakeholders to come and watch your study, and actually, the ones who have, who are more important to your success, you want those people to actually, basically give their blessing to what you're trying to do. In terms of what usability testing is, sometimes if you have no familiarity with this, it's helpful to show how it fits into other types of research methods, and that's what this slide is all about. This was put together by Christian Rohrer, who's actually one of the thinkers in this field. You can see here there's an axis, the x-axis, you have qualitative study, which is direct face-to-face, going out to quantitative, which would be like surveys where you don't see the individual, but you're able to scale it to hundreds or thousands of people. And on the y-axis, we have attitude going up to behavior. And if you look at here, like for example, focus groups, they're all about qualitative. They're all about face-to-face. There's no automation there. It's all very human and warm. And in a focus group, you're really looking to understand that person's perceptions, opinions, their attitudes, kind of how they think. And on this end here of quantitative, and I'm just showing you this so that you get a good sense of what these types of research methods are, you have, say, A/B testing, where you never see the person. You just kind of like passively collect the data of them using the website. So this is purely quantitative, and you're looking at their behavior. Usability lab studies are highly qualitative, highly eyeball to eyeball, where you're watching the person's body language, their facial expressions, tone of voice, all of that stuff matters, it's all data. Yet you're observing their behavior. Now, in a typical usability study, the mantra typically is, watch what they do, not what they say, because you're really looking solely at their behavior for the most part. Now, what can you usability test? Well, you can usability test anything that's interactive. So any artifact that a person will interact with. And that's a very wide range of products. So what I have here, for example, there's a robotic vacuum cleaner, the Roomba, there's a blood glucose monitor, bike sharing services, apps, applications, all of the things that you typically think of, but you really can usability test anything where the user is going to be interacting with that product, and there won't be somebody off to the side kind of telling them what it all means. These are all good candidates for usability testing. Very big. Another thing, before we stop for a moment to answer questions, usability testing actually has been around since World War II, really, and it fits into a lot of the common frameworks that we have today. For example, design thinking. So with design thinking, what you do is you do those early qualitative and trend research, and you learn about your target end user. Then what you do is you get together with the stakeholders, and you kind of figure out what the direction of this product should be. What is the user's mental model? What should the design approach be? So you would ideate on that, and then what you're going to do is you're going to create prototypes, and those prototypes start off very primitive, really just the concept, and they become progressively more refined till you actually get to what the product's going to look like. But here's where usability testing comes into play. You're testing a prototype, or you're testing a completed product, and you're doing this sort of thing over and over and over iteratively. And with each set of tests, what you're doing is you're improving the product design. So at this point, Tim, would you like to pause for a moment and see if there are any questions?
Sure, I do have a couple. I appreciate the break here. First one is, I'm not sure there's any particular magic bullet, but one of the issues that we have run up against is time. That being, we have an end user community that is very busy and has project deadlines, while we are working on a project deadline to do development, and it's difficult to grab them and do the usability testing that need to be done. I'm expanding here a little bit so that they don't end up with an application that they don't want.
Oh, okay.
So, the gist is, any suggestions on how to, again, without a magic bullet, how to grab people's time and make it important before the cutover?
Oh, okay. I would say offer food.
There
So
you go.
you might have like a lunchtime usability set of usability sessions and order a bunch of pizzas and have, train several people in the method and just have a usability lunch, basically. That would be one way to do it. Another way is really to offer some sort of incentive. A lot of times with usability testing, especially if it's new to your organization, there's a period of ramp up. You have to prove the value of this exercise, and then basically the organization will find time to do it once they see how important it is and how valuable it is.
That's excellent. Thank you. Second question, how do you do usability testing before you finish product design? So basically it sounds like almost iterative, kind of knowing the way projects run these days. Again, I'm expanding a little bit, probably like iterative usability testing before design is done. We don't want to, come out of the gate at the last minute. We want to do it iteratively along the way. So the bottom line question, can you usability test a product before you finish the design, and how would you do so?
You could most certainly can. What you do is you create very primitive prototypes, and if it's like for example an app, do paper prototyping of the design and put just those pieces of paper in front of the person. And what you do is you don't flesh out the whole design. You flesh out only those pieces of it that you care about, that aspect of the design. It's kind of a divide and conquer strategy. There's a really good book by Bill Buxton, who used to run the design at Microsoft. It's called, I think, Sketching the User Interface. But he talks in that book about how you do this prototype testing. And he shows physical products as well as online products. It's a little old, but the concept is good and the method is very sound.
Great, thank you. Good answers.
You're welcome. Alrighty, so I'm going to return to my slides now. Okay, so here we have another topic. So why would you want to run a usability study? Well, there's lots of reasons. These are typical reasons for running a usability study. At the end of the day, though, you want to look good. You want your product to be high quality. You want to avoid rework. So there's all kinds of good reasons for running a usability study, and these are listed here. And in the interest of time, I'm going to just kind of walk through this a little bit faster because we need to finish by 12:30. But, the idea too is this is not a one-shot thing. You want to, once you might start with usability testing to get credibility for this exercise in your organization, but you definitely want to have kind of a project plan for when you're going to do your testing throughout the product life cycle. That's really, really critical, and also be doing that usability testing at different points along the design and development until you're ready to kind of release the whole thing. So how do you plan and carry out a usability study? Well, there's really 4 kind of high-level phases of a usability study. First, you're planning it. Then you run it, which includes moderation. Then you analyze the results, and then you report the results. And this is if you're doing a usability test from scratch, you should budget, as the person who's like the person running it, moderating it, and kind of handling all these phases, you should budget about 70 hours for the effort of your own time, not everybody else, just your time. So it's a fairly big commitment, and you really do need to understand how to do it correctly to make sure you're getting good results. So basically, these are the steps that you would follow. You set objectives, you recruit participants, you pick the venue. All of this here, you create the task list, you pilot the study, you moderate it, you collect data. It's actually a lot, but there's a logical flow to it, as you would see once you get into it. And in our class, we cover all of this. Now, one of the most important things that you're going to do is you're going to be defining the objectives, and that is, what are the areas of focus? So one way to do this would be to actually pretend you're one of the people using the product, and then just basically yourself, in a common sense way, walk through the use of the product. And through that exercise, it's eye-opening, because you'll see where the glitches are. Although when you actually run the usability study, you'll see more because you have people who are totally outside the orbit of any development. Another way to do a usability, sort of like figure out where the usability issues are, is to do a heuristic review of the product. And one thing I'd like to direct your attention to is there is a methodology about this, and again, we teach this in the class. That's how you actually analyze a product for usability issues, and it's the Nielsen-Molick usability heuristics. So you would walk through the product looking at these 10 qualities here and just kind of evaluate the product along those 10 dimensions. Basically, in this case, giving it a score from, say, 1 to 5, and 1 might be no usability issues here with this particular heuristic, and a 5 would be, wow, there's no feedback in this product. The language is foreign to what our target audience would understand. And it's just, these exercises here help you and the team kind of understand where users might fall down. And these would be things that you'd want to test. So then what you do is you would take those issues, you translate them into the task list, as you see here, and you're going to build that task list basically as simply as possible around the usability issues where you actually have the user doing that task on their own and you're collecting feedback, you're noticing their reaction. And during the study, as they work through the task list, you're scoring that person on how they did in that particular task. And in this case here, not difficult, a little difficult, very difficult. So it just kind of gives you a sense, after you've run, say, 4 or 5 studies, where the usability issues might be, which aspects of the design need to be refined for this product to be more usable. Now, typically what I do is after each study, I create like a heat map in Excel, and it's organized by, these would be the tasks that the user is doing, these are the participants. And I mark off with these little Ghostbuster symbols here where the person failed to do that task. What was the reason they failed? Or maybe they did it easily, so there's no notation here at all. Or maybe this little warning sign saying, yeah, they finished it, but it took them longer than it should have, and these were the reasons where they experienced friction. After you've collected, you've run, say, 8 to 10 studies, that's typical for usability tests, you want to analyze the results, and these would be typically the way you would look at that raw data that you've collected. Where did they succeed, where did they fail, what was easy, what was hard. It's best to pull in verbatim comments that represent difficulty. And then also you're always going to be regrouping with your observers to get their take, their perspective on what happened. Now, another method, and we learned this in the class, is affinity diagramming, and that's where instead of having people write what they're noticing on in an Excel spreadsheet, what you do is you give everyone a sticky note, a set of sticky notes, and they record the issues that they're seeing, and you collect the sticky notes at the end, and then you use a different colored sticky note for each issue observed. And the beauty of this is then you have a meeting where everybody who was part of the study, everybody who observed, comes, and you lay out everybody's sticky notes, and folks organize those sticky notes as a group, and they label the groupings. And so what you see here is all the sticky notes describing, in this case, issues users had with setting the clock, and you can tell by the color which participant had issues and the nature of those participants. So it's just kind of a quick and easy way to get agreement from your people in terms of what the problems are, who had them. So this is a great team building activity, and it also cuts down the amount of work you need to do in your analysis. Now, in terms of reporting, you always want to bring everybody in the team along with you. So you want to make sure that everybody agrees before you write that report on what the issues are and some possible solutions, and then give those issues some sort of prioritization in terms of when they should be fixed. So in this case here's the issue, lack of product information. Here's a succinct description of what that issue is. Here is some resolutions that the team brainstormed, and they feel that this is a very high priority to fix. A couple other little pointers here is in terms of how, the best way to run a usability study is you want to, wherever you're running that study, and I said this earlier, is you want to make sure that that setting where you're running the study matches the user's context of use as much as possible. In a lab, it's more contrived and controlled, but it's easier to run the studies, and it's logistically easier to get everybody, in the situation where they can watch. You can also run them in a conference room. There's different ways of doing this. In a real world context is more difficult, but in a lot of ways there are sort of pressures and variables in the real environment that may not occur to you in terms of product design that you'll capture if you're in a real world context. Another huge area that you need to do right is recruiting. You want to make sure you have the right people there. If you only have a couple of tests that you're able to run, I would probably favor getting people who are more power users of that genre of product. And for that reason, the reason for that is that they can give you perspective on how your product matches similar products that they've used. You also, there's a whole sequence to how you find people that you need to learn. And also you want to make sure that those participants fully understand what a usability study is and exactly what they'll be doing in that study. Now, in terms of moderating a study, the watchword is do not bias the person, keep things moving, help them feel comfortable, and make sure that you're doing things so that you're collecting good data. And unfortunately, in the interest of time, I can't go into this in detail, but there's quite a bit involved in the skill of moderating that really does make or break a study. Now, in terms of managing observers, the best way is, just to have good relationships with the people that you're, who were there, and make sure that they understand what their role is, and that they should, that they really should behave themselves so that they keep the participant very comfortable. Also, the other thing is you want to be able to match your testing approach to product development. So in formative studies, you're using more prototypes, and you really don't have the design nailed down. In the summative part, it's more evaluative, it's more structured. You're talking a whole lot less with the participant, and you just want to see if that design can stand on its own 2 feet. Now, as a final tip, make sure that you always run a pilot. There are a lot of moving parts to running a usability study, and you want to make sure that you're comfortable. Above all, don't ever expect perfection. I've been doing this for decades, and I'm still very imperfect. I make mistakes all the time. But if you run pilots and you're comfortable with all the different aspects of the study, that will give you the confidence to do a great job. And with that, we're finished. So I'm wondering at this point if folks have any questions.
Okay, we do have a couple. We just wanted to make sure, too, that you know that we can obviously dive deeper in the topic. So there are some trainings that are coming up and that are available, in addition to, of course, training of a particular customized nature that would be available on request or for a larger group at your company. Beyond that, Kay, before I dive into the questions that we have, is there anything else that you wanted to say as far as this particular slide is concerned?
Well, except thank you. And what we're offering here is we have 1-day virtual classes and 2-day classes that are face-to-face in person. And the benefit of the 2-day class is that I weave in more detail, plus also a lot of hands-on. So you'll have opportunities to actually set up and run your own usability study. So when you leave the 2-day class, you would have the confidence to be able to pick this up and do this within your own organization.
That's excellent. Thank you, Kay. I learned a bunch during this webinar myself, so I very much appreciate it. First question, could you differentiate between usability and user experience?
That's a great question. It's actually an alphabet soup. It all boils down to the same thing, but it also shows that this field is evolving. When I started out in the early 90s, there really was no formal type of profession. So we would call ourselves product designers, and what we did in the type of work that I did and my colleagues did, we did usability testing and user interface design. So over time, and with other influences, like for example design thinking and jobs to be done, and a lot of these other kind of frameworks that really parallel the kind of work that a usability person does, the language around the job titles changed. and it evolved into user experience. Now, user experience is essentially the same thing, the same skill set as usability, at least in my mind. What you're doing, the focus of your work is to upfront use research methods, tried and true research methods like ethnographies and uh, in-depth interviewing, focus groups, online communities, a lot of research methods that are used in other areas such as market research. We leverage those in the service of understanding the end user and being able to identify who those end users are and create typologies of them, personas. And so that's one piece, is figuring out who the end users are. And then what you do is you just go and you become an expert and an objective expert in terms of what is that person's journey when they're using, when they're, say, doing the manual thing that you're trying to automate, or, interacting with technology in whatever product area that you're focused in. And just being able to do sound research and report those results back to the design team, back to the engineering team, and product marketing, product management, so that everybody's on the same page in terms of A, who are our end users, and B, what are the relevant things that we need to understand about those users' needs, about their goals, about how they interact with technology, what is appropriate. That is the skill set of user experience as well as a usability person. And in my mind, they're equivalent. And in fact, in today's world, and I think that this is from the influence of techniques such as jobs to be done, it's now called experience. So they've even dropped the word user. So now it's experience, but essentially the charter is the same throughout. About experience, a lot of the technology that we're interacting with today is not screen-based. It's more kind of wearables and, kind of things in the environment like voice. So technology really is more than, it truly is an experience because it's ubiquitous. It's in our environment. So now the term is experience. It's no longer even user experience. It's experience. Experience designer, experience researcher. But the skill set is exactly the same as what it was, say, 25, 30 years ago.
Got it. Good. Thank you. Do you use a different approach when you're testing a prototype versus testing a finished product that's already out in the marketplace?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, when you're testing a prototype, it's more of a walkthrough. So if you're testing a prototype, you're really wanting to elicit from that participant all of their thinking, all of their impressions, everything related to their reaction to that prototype. So in that kind of an environment, it's called formative. I did have a slide for that. It's okay to talk to the person. This is less scientific and more about being able to draw the person out and really get good feedback and understand what their mental model is and what their, how the implications of this design matches their way of working. So that's how you test a prototype. When you have a product that's out there in the marketplace, or say a competitor's product, you want to interfere as the moderator as little as possible. You want the tasks to be cut and dried, ones that you can score yes or no, were they able to do it? If not, why not? If they struggled, why? So it's more sort of traditional usability testing. That's the approach that you would take with a finished product. And you also are collecting more metrics on the end, so you might be because nobody's talking. You can also more reliably collect like time on task and things that are more cut and dried, but actually are really good feedback. But you're letting the product kind of do all the work, and you're not intervening at all as the moderator.
Excellent. Good. So, Kay, I'm out of questions, and almost everybody stayed for the extra time to go through the Q&A. So, again, our thanks to all in our audience, and our thanks to you, Kay, for leading us through an excellent webinar. We appreciate it.
Great. Thank you very much, Tim. Thanks, audience. Take care.
All right.
Bye-bye now.
Take care.